Hi, good morning. Welcome to our event today. My name's Andy Gray, the local enterprise manager for NatWest on the East Coast. And thanks everyone for joining us today live or via the recording for this special sustainable business event. And I'm pleased to be hosting some real expert speakers today who'll be taking us through some of the key aspects of sustainable business and debunking some myths along the way. So today I'm really pleased to be introducing Peter, who's going to touch on the current academic research on business adapting to climate change. We've got Charlie, who's going to explore what we mean by sustainable business and is the theory finally meeting practice. Alistair's going to touch on what this actually means for business with pressures from consumers and regulators and focus on environment and carbon emissions. And Fran is going to look at ESG, which is environmental, social and governance, and purpose-driven business. So what is ESG, how to start this with busy SMEs in mind, and does anyone care? And of course, at the end will be ample time for Q&A. And if you're watching on record, we'll put some contact details as well, so you can ask our speakers in your own time. So I just wanted to touch before we go on to the main event today. So why have we put on this event as NatWest today? So quite simply, it's because this is important. It's important that us as a major supporter of small business across the country, that we're sharing knowledge and skills to help businesses make the change to the low carbon economy. And it's also important that we understand as a group why this needs to be addressed between all of us, and it's not just seen as a top-down initiative from governments and large businesses. So before we jump into the main event, you know, the question could be asked actually, as NatWest, what are we doing to take the lead on the transition to the low carbon economy? So this is a priority for the bank, and it's NatWest has become one of the 43 banks globally to join the Net Zero Banking Alliance, which is a coalition of different financial services companies, and we're all working together to help deliver the Paris Agreement. NatWest are also the banking sponsor of COP26, which is coming up in November 2021. And this just demonstrates the commitment to working collaboratively with peers and policymakers across the world to bring about significant change and at speed to help build this more climate resilient economy. And also the bank has signed up to the Net Zero Banking Alliance commitments, which includes transitioning all operational and financed emissions to net zero by 2050 at the latest. So previously we've said we want to do this by 2030, and actually as of 2020, the bank's carbon emissions are net zero as of last year. And lastly, the bank did become the first UK major financial institution to publish analysis of its financed emissions of global oil and gas extraction, automotive manufacturing and agricultural sectors as well, including residential mortgage properties. And what we're going to do is continue to analyse this over the continuing future. So some real good steps there from bank. It's important that we do our bit, but actually it's also important that we support smaller businesses in their pursuit of this really important goal. So what we're going to do is introduce firstly Peter Ellington, Dr. Peter Ellington from Triple Bottom Line Accounting. So Peter, we're going to talk about sustainability and purpose-led businesses, and we kind of use these phrases quite liberally. But actually, it might be really good if I can hand over to you and sort of let's explore kind of what those mean.
Yes, certainly, Andrew. So in my first slide, we're going to go. I'm a doctor in education, and I've recently completed my doctorate and passed it first time through a Viva. It was 7 years of study at the Institute of Education, which is the leading body in the world in education studies. People do their PGCEs, and people learn how to teach others through their program. And so I have a doctorate in education, which I'm very proud of myself for getting, because it's a lot of work. In addition to doing that doctorate, I'm an associate professor at the Norwich Business School, where I teach on the executive MBA, I teach taxation, and I teach management accounting as well. And in my spare time, I'm the owner and founder, or part owner and founder, of Triple Bottom Line Accounting, which now employs 11 people, and we're growing rapidly, 30% per annum. Last year's growth was actually 40%. So we're growing at some speed, and it's because we are triple bottom line accounting, which is about not just about profit, but it's about people and planet. And today we're going to explain what we're doing and why we see that as important, and why that position in the accountancy market is quite a niche, and why we believe it's so important. But we're not anything that we make in profit from accountancy. We're putting back in to our people and planet part of our business, because it's our purpose, and that's what's driving the growth. It's because of our purpose. So I'd just like to first talk about my academic work. And so, okay, so here's some major bits of economic work. Now, part of my doctorate was to have a literature review, and also to have a philosophical position. Okay, so the whole underlying basis for my work was Roy Basker. And now, because you have to have a philosophical position as part of a doctorate, and Roy Basker is the founder of a school of thought called critical realism. Now, that school of thought is that we have a crisis, and it's not just a climate crisis, but it's a crisis on what Roy Basker called all four planes of human being. And that's at the very high level, our relationship with nature, how we are with nature. And then there's an issue with the rich elites and how wealth is distributed through populations, not just in the UK, but across the world. Then you've got, everybody's experiencing this, polarization in society. You're either for Brexit or against Brexit, and very few people are in between, seeing both sides of the coin. So there's this polarization on all issues, and that's something that's sort of happened in recent years, that it's either you're one or the other, rather than seeing the nuances of things. And then finally, we keep on hearing there's a personal crisis in how people are, in having a mental health crisis, but generally coping with the pandemic and coping with all the issues in the world today. Then we move on to the fact that it has been reported 11,000 scientists from 153 countries have called for the fact that there's a climate crisis and we need to do something about it as humanity. And that what we need to do is talked about as being an economic and social change, a complete shift in how we are as a society, which is difficult to handle because it's such a shift from where we are now, where it's all about neoliberal capitalism, to what's called stakeholder capitalism or reimagining capitalism. And now we've also got the Dasgupta review, which looks at economics from a biodiversity perspective, which is a fantastic and essential to read. And then just to quote a famous quote from Foster here, Foster et al. 2011, is that the crisis is that humanity has become alienated from both itself and from nature, and it has now the ability to destroy everything around it, including itself. And of course, just mentioning the Paris Accord there, where we have been asked, or it's been recommended, that we keep to 1.5 degrees centigrade in climate warming, but the current commitments from governments across the world are about 3, and the scientists are saying if we tip over 1.5, we just don't know what's going to happen. Okay, so moving to the next slide. So here's sort of some of my readings. So really important book there, Global Capitalism and the Crisis of Humanity, but I'm not going to read those books up. There's some brilliant books there. So for example, Willful Blindness, How Humanity Is and How We Can Carry on Doing What We're Doing and Ignore the Climate Crisis. Another thing came out of my research, which I think is really important, is that we're fighting fires on a day-to-day basis. We have to make profit. We have to make sure that the cash is coming in, and that climate change is seen as a medium to long-term issue. But the problem is those businesses that see it and start planning for the medium and the long term are going to be the ones that are successful. Those that just wait for the fires to arrive, usually the one fire will be too big and it will burn them. So I can't understress this. It's a climate crisis. It's a crisis for humanity, and we need to be addressing it, each one of us individually. Some people are on that journey, some people aren't. Some people have to go through quite a change when they realize the crisis that we're in. I mean, I've watched a Financial Times video that says, I don't know how to tell you this, but I'm in 2050, I'm in Manchester, and I have my designated hour outside at 12 o'clock because the biosphere won't support the humans out there for too long, and it's harmful to go outside. So is that the future that we want? That's the big question. Here, the issue that this is, the social and economic change that we're seeing is coming from a number of aspects. So you've got the government, employees, investors, the natural world, economic change, technology, customers, and society. And I'm now just going to, the next slide just then talks about what that actually means. So there's a lot of pressure on us as businesses and on individual for that social and economic change. Now, I'm not going to read all this slide for you, but if you look at governments, we're getting COP26, even the nudges, departmental in the government called the Nudge Department is looking to see how we can use behavioral economics to nudge people towards this different future. If you look at employees, we just recruited 3 people. They specifically chose us to work for because we're a living wage employer, because we're looking at that new future, because we're employing people on a 4-day week, and they're seeing that we're doing something about that they're concerned about. We're hearing about impact investment, and that we've got more impact investment funds, which are requiring boards of directors to realign their businesses towards this new future. The natural world is telling us there's a problem. There's floods, fires, and all different things, including a pandemic, that's telling us we need to change. From an economic perspective, there's tipping points, and we talk about tipping points in economics, but there's tipping points in climate change that are going to affect us. Massive technology changes that are going to enable us to shift. Then you've got our customers. Now, government policy is going to mean that when you're trying to supply to government agencies and other larger organizations as a SME, you have to show that you're on the journey to net zero. And part of the measurements of your carbon output will be how much you spend on suppliers. And so from our perspective, we're going to be net zero. We're very close to it. And we can show that our carbon count to our customers is very low, and it enables them to have a low contribution to carbon. And then from a society perspective, society is talked about every day now. You can't avoid it. Climate change and what we're doing. So we're seeing a major shift in how we are as society. So then finally, my final slide is just to say there's an S-curve. So S-curves are adoption of mobile phones, the adoption of TV. You get to a point where everybody's talking about it, everybody starts shifting and thinking about the future. And then you get this period of hypergrowth. Now, we believe that we're at that tipping point where businesses, consumers, on all of those points pushing towards the tipping point are going to push us over so that we get a rapid adoption of businesses, not just going for profit, but for considering their purpose, and their purpose being aligned to climate change and social change. And once that happens, and if it hasn't already happened, we're then on a rapid adoption where people are only going to do, or businesses are only going to do business, and people are only going, consumers are only going to do business with people that have this purpose that is aligned to climate change and social change. And SMEs are 25% of UK emissions and a very large part of our economy. And our growth is at 40%. We believe our growth is going to be, we're going to be 100 and 200% growth, because we are an accountancy practice that is switched on to this. And once people start saying we can only do business with an accountancy practice that is switched on to climate change and social change, there's too few of them around. So we're picking up lots of business because of this. So it's a business necessity. Our purpose is to help businesses through this and to measure not just their profit, but their purpose and their social and environmental footprint. So it's happening. You can't avoid it. And that's my slide. That's my part. Okay, thanks, Andrew.
Hi there. Thanks for that, Pete. I'll just quickly introduce myself. I'm Charlie Flanagan, part of TBLA as a trainee accountant and part of the ESG Impact Narrative Service that we're newly started running. I'm going to talk about is theory finally meeting practice. So if we move over to the next slide, the first element of that, which Andy sort of alluded to, is what is sustainability? And I think we should start with the traditional definition. And that is that sustainability has always related to business longevity, creation of wealth for shareholders, success, growth, very financial elements. But I think there's a paradigm shift now where there's a more contemporary version of it. And sustainability is a bit more encompassing and includes external factors like the environment and society. So, for example, there's an academic named Brundtland who states that business sustainability requires balancing the resources of the future. And I quite like that. And I think that, along with Lash and Conaway's definition of sustainability, it's quite good for us to get a good understanding of what it genuinely means now. So Lash and Conaway said that there's two characteristics. There's horizontal sustainability, which involves the creation of harmony between social, environmental, and economic components of your business. So, encapsulating them all together and making sure that they're harmonious, it's all well and good and having a positive impact. But then we can move on to the purpose-led businesses that have this other element, the second characteristic, vertical sustainability, which is where they're actually trying to go above and beyond and improve and protect each different element. And in my opinion, that's the only way to truly achieve a sustainability, because there's a lot of work to be done, and it's very important that it's done sooner rather than later, as Pete was saying. So you can see how that traditional definition has sort of adopted over time and changed, but there's still that key economic component that's really important. And then there's the individual element. I know I spoke about it with Fran, and it's really quite interesting to think about businesses as groups of people, and people, that's what they are at their core. And without them and their different versions of sustainability, it questions what a business's purpose is. So I'm a young man, so when I think about sustainability, I think more about the social factors. That's just an internal bias of mine. But everyone's is going to be a bit different, and it's getting that balancing again to really make sure that sustainability is achieved. If we move over to the next slide, we can sort of look at the current state of the business landscape. And it's an analogy that's probably a bit overused, but it's the frog in the pot. And the frog is basically in cold water that is getting heated so gradually that it fails to even notice and eventually dies. And I think that's a good encapsulation of what's happening, because businesses that aren't adopting sustainable practices are falling behind, as Pete was sort of alluding to and saying. They're not only affecting our future as people, as a planet, but their own too. And there's a mountain of evidence to suggest that operating sustainably is really beneficial. So if we move over to the next slide, we can see a case of this with Ørsted. Ørsted are an Danish, I believe, energy provider who were founded in 1972. They've been around for 50 years, and their operations actually thrived off the use of non-renewable resources. And as you can see, they were one of the most coal-intensive companies in Europe at one point in time. But they've adapted, and they've had this transformational change where I think for the last 2 years, they've been labelled as the most sustainable company in the world. And that's obviously had a great social and environmental impact that's positive. But selfishly, they're reaping the rewards of this change, because they're ranked as the 294th most valuable company in the world, and their turnover ranks them in the top 1,000. And I think they fit that definition of sustainability, that contemporary one especially, really well. And they prove that profitability and sustainability can coexist harmoniously. I will say that this transformational change isn't necessarily easy, but the idea that a massive energy provider that has deep-rooted operations that are unethical in nature has been able to pivot and has been agile enough to do so sort of paves the way for us as smaller businesses. You know, I think the question now becomes, why wouldn't you adopt sustainable practices and have this sort of mindset? If you can see it benefiting these big companies, then surely you're going to benefit too. And then as an accountant, we sort of look at it through that lens. So if we move on to the next slide, you can see that there's a picture of George Serafeim and his team at the Harvard Business School are trying to revamp the financial accounts creation process. You can see it's called the impact weighted financial accounts, and their purpose is to make financial accounts creation process more holistic, so it encompasses a company's financial, social, and environmental performance. You know, this is really important work because everyone has to file a set of accounts, and it's something that's going to impact everyone. But currently, it can be argued that companies like Ørsted, or even like us, TBLA, are being a bit undervalued because the current financial accounts that are created today are a bit one-dimensional, and they're created on a financial basis. So, you know, arguably, Ørsted could be worth a lot more than 294th in the world. And then moving on from that, investors are looking for ESG reports and plans when making investment decisions. I think if we just pop back to the last slide, sorry, Andy, 85% of the public want their investments to do more than merely prioritize financial returns. And I think that's something that we can all relate to and feel. And again, that question re-arises as small businesses, why wouldn't you be implementing sustainable practices? Especially entrepreneurs and startups, because these considerations should be a bit of a no-brainer. And to sort of big ourselves up a bit, we're trying to create that ESG impact narrative service that will support individuals who do believe in this and think it's important. Thank you. I'll pass over to Alistair to talk more about the business case of everything. Cheers.
Hi, my name's Alistair Wilcock. I'm the owner of Maplecone Limited, and I work with Maplecone to support organisations in terms of their environmental impact, particularly decarbonisation. But I've been working now with the TBLA team for about a year now to develop the impact narratives and the support that is now being rolled out for small and medium-sized enterprises to help that ESG aspect of business. So the question I'm going to try and answer is, what does this mean for our businesses? Because here we are, busy with our noses to the grindstone, trying to make the most of every available opportunity, and looking to make sure that we have a business tomorrow, next week, and also next year and in 10 years' time. So I'm going to draw upon some work that Michael Porter did many years ago, must be probably 30 years ago now, of the 5 competitive forces, in which he provides a model of the competition that a business experiences when working in a particular industry segment. Whether it's a service, whether they're producing a product, it doesn't make any difference. It's all quite well encompassed in this. So the 5 forces that he talks about are the force, or the competition from competitors within the industry segment. There's also the very powerful force that comes from the buyers, and including in there, you can also include investors, the people who are either investing in the business or purchasing the product or service that the organization is generating. Looking the other way down the supply chain, there are the suppliers, and they are they will maybe be quite powerful, or they might be quite weak in terms of their competitive pressure that they can exert upon one's own business. And then we can turn to the other 2 aspects in the vertical direction, one of which is new people, new organizations coming into the existing market. So potential entrants coming into the industry to compete directly, or substitute products, so alternative products or alternative services that change the game a bit and look to compete at a different level. So if we move on, we can look at the aspects of how this works with regard to environmental considerations. It could be applied in other ways as well, both in the social and also the governance side. But to keep things simple, because we've only got limited time this morning, we'll look at it just from an environmental aspect. So thinking about the competitors within the industry, that blue box in the middle, how are the competitors in the industry faring as far as their environmental performance is concerned? Do they have a better environmental performance than one's own company, or is it less good and it gives you a strategic advantage in having that better performance? This is particularly applicable when it comes to the demands and preferences of buyers and also the investors that I mentioned before. Some research has indicated that about 1/3 of the global assets under management are now subscribed to a net zero pledge. So there are some big names in there. I won't recite them, but it's very indicative of the fact that the world is changing in terms of how we invest our money, how pensions funds invest their money on the large scale, and how even angel investors and people like that will be investing in smaller organizations. The customers now are saying that they would be inclined to pay higher than average prices for products with a high quality or high other factors, for example, strong sustainability practices. So there is potential extra margin in that as well. Thinking about the suppliers, how much influence do those suppliers have? Peter mentioned that we are looking now for suppliers that have a good environmental reputation. So suppliers in that case, perhaps you'll be looking for suppliers that will have that good environmental reputation in order to reduce the overall impact that your organization is having. Perhaps the suppliers may be in a stronger position and be looking for customers that have a good environmental reputation. Perhaps they will be leaning on you as much as you are leaning on them in order to improve that environmental performance. Then we've got the entrants coming into the business, into the industry, and they may well score higher in terms of environmental performance. And equally, there may be a substitute product or service that comes along that has a completely different dynamic to it, which means that it is better from an environmental performance point of view. And then, of course, regulation. I've added an extra box in there, so this is the sixth force. Environmental regulation, of course, is becoming tighter and tighter, but those are the absolute minimums that must all be achieved, not those performance enhancing and business enhancing over and above expectations that so many other organizations will have. So how do we do this? Well, to work towards having a better environmental impact, our strong belief is that we should start simple. So what are the most important things to you as a business owner, as to you as an organization, and the stakeholders that are invested in your organization, either as customers, as suppliers, or investors. Start those measures really simply, as I've said, and then track them over a period of time. Look to see how those can be improved. The very fact that they are being measured and tracked keeps a focus on them, and looking at that improvement in environmental performance then can actually produce benefit in terms of costs, as well as the profile of the organization. And then improve over time the accuracy of the measurement, and also adding in further measures. So it might be that environmental performance is the one that you want to start with. Then you might move into social, and then into governance, or some other sequence that works for you. And of course, continuous improvement is the name of the game. We can't ever rest on our laurels. So it's a matter of making sure that we get better and better. Apart from the lovely warm feeling inside, and perhaps the bit that we are doing our bit, it's also important to make sure that people know about what it is that we're doing in this field. So it's really important to tell our stakeholders, tell our customers, the investors and people like that, because, as I said before, the investors are looking to invest in environmentally sustainable businesses. So attract more of them by telling them. Tell those stakeholders, use narratives, use blogs, use social media, whatever the right channels are, in order to be able to get to those people that you wish to influence. And that includes, of course, your suppliers, to help them to have the incentive to change as well. Thank you. Over to Fran.
Hi. So I'm Fran Ellington. I'm a co-owner of Triple Bottom Line Accounting. I'm the Business Development Director, and I'm leading our ESG Impact Narrative Service in collaboration with Alistair of Maple Cone, who's just spoken. So Alistair was concentrating on environment, but obviously his little model in the previous slide on how you can start this process can be applied to environment, to social, to governance. So I wanted to explain a little bit about what we mean by ESG and some of the certifications and accreditations that go with it. I'll reiterate what everybody has said in a different way this morning, but I think is so important, whether it's fighting the fire in front of you, as Peter said, or the frog in the pot mentioned by Charlie, is that we can all talk about the economic reasons for looking at ESG more carefully and measuring it. It is the future. It is going to be the model for any business that's going to sustain themselves, to survive. So there's an economic reason for doing it. But, you know, fundamentally, if we're not able to sustain our biosphere and our hydrosphere and you know, support nature and human life as part of the natural world, then we're not going to have any businesses. It's not going to be our priority. So, you know, we can talk about warm feelings about doing something good. And it is right to do these things. It's morally right to do these things. It's ethically right. And I would say, when I emphasize you know, the economic reasons as I go through these slides, that's the kind of knock-on effect as far as I'm concerned. It's not the main focus, but, you know, if we're going to sustain ourselves, the natural world, then we will sustain our businesses as well. Okay, and we all are part of the problem, and we are all part of the solution. So ESG seems to be the term of now and the term of the future. It's looking at ways of analysing, measuring and improving the impact of a business from an environmental, social and governance point of view. And they're all interrelated. If we have social inequality, if we have an employment, you know, workforce nationally and globally that can't actually sustain itself, it's not going to be thinking about how it's going to reduce its carbon footprint, because it can't afford to. Yeah. Okay. So it's important that we look at all three. So I've just done a slide there that explains that in more detail, but I want to move on to the next slide, which looks at, compares another perhaps more well-known in the past, very well, pretty much the same thing really, corporate social responsibility. It's how I was introduced to this idea of, you know, being a socially and ethically balanced business, and quite often university undergraduates are taught about, in business schools are taught about corporate social responsibility, because most business schools are still catching up with what's going on now, and there's nothing wrong with CSR. It's exactly the same thing as ESG, but it's tended to perhaps become associated with that traditional business model that Charlie talked about in his first slide, where, you know, as a business, we're just thinking about maximizing profits so that we can pay dividends to our investors, to our shareholders, so that we can reinvest in the business and we can keep making bigger and bigger profits. And then such large corporations that have traditionally done this might give a little bit, you know, maybe a percent, you know, a fraction of a percentage to a good cause, get some, you know, good publicity from it, but not really think about its much bigger impact. That's unfair, because a lot of, as I say, CSR is really the same as ESG, but ESG is going to be the term that you're going to hear about more and more often. And it is perhaps a little bit clearer, because it's looking at environment, social and governance, how you're treating your staff, how fair you are within your own business. So I'll just quote from a couple of facts. HSBC has said recently that ESG stocks did best in the COVID-19 slump. So that's what's happening now. The Financial Times is writing about the fact that ESG funds forecast to outnumber conventional funds by 2025. And at the opposite end of the political spectrum, the Morning Star wrote in February of this year that we expect 2021 to be the year when ESG truly enters the mainstream. So there's good economic reason to be thinking about your own business ESG model and how you're going to measure that. So if we could swiftly move on to an image I have here of a whole range, a non-exhaustive range of badges, accreditations, certifications you can get to prove that you are socially, environmentally, good as a company, that you've passed the ISO 14001, therefore you're environmentally sound, that you've got your BCorps, you've got your various sustainability goals sorted out, and that looks good. It can also be a little bit detrimental if you just happen to be one of those companies that likes collecting badges, and then you have all these attachments to each of your email footers that frustrates your clients and your suppliers, and can perhaps look a little bit inauthentic. So I'm not against collecting certifications and accreditations, and at Triple Bottom Line we have done that with a few, because it's forced our hand, it's forced us to make the changes that we want to make, and it's made us think about things that we might not have thought about before. So they are good. But what we like to emphasize is that an authentic narrative can be just as effective and very compelling. It can be compelling for recruitment. It's a narrative that you tell your current employees that they feel that they're part of something very special and something that is going to make a difference, that they actually are part of that solution, they join in with it with you, and obviously your customers, your suppliers, and so on. So my next slide explains a little bit more about perhaps what we can think about in terms of governance, in terms of how we are paying ourselves and our employees. Okay, now if you're a small emerging company, it might just be you and one other person, and you need to be thinking to the future and how you can afford to employ people. Are you going to squeeze them? Are you going to put an 18, 19-year-old on the apprenticeship scheme, get some funding from government, which is great, but only pay them £4.30, so they can't move on, they can't rent a house, they can't afford to do all these things. We are familiar with perhaps the UK national minimum wage and national living wage for under 23s and over 23s in the middle column there. And the national living wage was introduced in 2016 by the UK government, and it confused people who were following the Living Wage Foundation, which was talking about a real living wage. Okay, so although it was an improvement on the minimum wage by a few pence, it's not really based on any significant research on what the average individual or family or household needs to get by. So at Triple Bottom Line, we pay everyone at least the real living wage. And our hand was forced because we wanted to get this accreditation. We looked at ourselves. Everybody was being paid more than the £9.50 an hour if you divided their salary up by their hours in the week and in the month. But we'd just recruited a trainee bookkeeper, and we realised that actually we weren't paying that person quite the living wage. We raised her, within a few months of her starting, actually a few weeks of her starting, we said, right, okay, we're going to pay you more. She was totally motivated. She works really hard. She studies hard. She's so proud to be part of the company. And as a result, obviously, her salary has gone up since. And so we've got, a motivated member of staff who's key to our business, actually, and, and feels very much part of this ESG movement. So that's just one aspect of governance. My next slide just sort of really asks the question that Alistair also asked, is where do you start? As a small, very busy SME, you're thinking, I haven't got time for any of this. Alistair's graphic of the steps said, we'll start with something that you can make a difference with, that is important to you, and you can make some sort of impact with very little effort. And it's just building that momentum that will then get you to move faster. So I just talked about the middle one there, employees, something as simple as looking at how much you're paying them, and is that fair, and is that equitable, and is the director getting paid hugely more than the lowest person in your organization? Is that right? Is that proper? So the impact narrative that we're offering, service that we're offering, is helping you make that first decision. What's important to you? My next slide shows you two badges there that we've achieved: the Good Business Charter and the Living Wage Foundation. And I like the Good Business Charter because it gave us 10 principles. It's really accessible for very small companies. It's free in the first year, and I think it's only £1 an employee in the second year to keep this accreditation. So 11 employees, it's going to cost us £11 next year. But it's doable. It makes you think about those 10 key principles. I'm very aware that we're running out of time, so I'll just perhaps look at one, which is number 9, ethical sourcing. It's an area that we started with as a team in Triple Bottom Line. We sort of thought about our purchasing. We hadn't got a purchasing policy, so let's create a purchasing policy that is, appropriate for an accountancy practice. We found that a lot of things we were buying on Amazon is not, I'm afraid, an ethical or socially fair or environmentally positive company. And we thought, actually, no, we can buy these things locally. We can buy them from more environmentally friendly businesses, manufacturers. It might take us a few more minutes to make the order. It might come a few days later, but it makes such a big difference. That's, the Good Business Charter is something that is growing very, very fast and teamed up with the living wage. So you have to pay the living wage to be a member of the Good Business Charter. I've got 2 more slides on accreditations, which I'll just gloss over very, very quickly. One that you might not have heard about is the Economy for the Common Good, which offers a balance sheet model. So as an accountancy practice, we quite like the look of that because it uses the term balance sheet or the common good matrix. It's very well used in Europe and particularly in German-speaking countries, but hasn't really taken off in the UK. But it has some lovely values across the top: human dignity, solidarity and social justice, environmental sustainability, transparency and co-determination, so that your team works together to make things happen. And it looks at the 5 stakeholders down the left-hand column. I can talk more about that, or if people want to know more about that, then you can look it up. The next one is perhaps better known in the UK. It's an international organisation, not-for-profit organisation, B Corps or certified B corporations. This is really what we mean by purpose-driven businesses. Okay, so we are, seeing our customers in our ESG impact narrative saying we want to go for B Corps, but it's hard. So you have to start with those small changes first. And then when you finally get to look at B Corps, which is quite rigorous, it has to be verified, by second and third parties, you've got something that is really worth it and really shows that you are a purpose-driven business. I've just highlighted in green ink there, I just like things that they say is that we must be the change we seek in the world, that through a company's products, practices and profits, businesses should aspire to do no harm and benefit all. It's a tall order. It's really hard to get there, but it's something that we all need to aspire for. I'm not saying that B Corps is the only one, but it's a good one to be thinking about perhaps for the future. Yes, B Corps in their introductory paragraph says, if you don't commit to the triple bottom line of business, then you're not going to be part of this solution. So if we move on just very, very quickly to not my last slide, but perhaps the last slide that I've got time for today, is the SME Climate Hub. Is well worth looking up. The UK government, with COP26 on the horizon, has partnered with the SME Climate Hub. The SME Climate Hub has been around for a while. It forces you as a business to make a commitment to reach net zero, and it explains why you have to do that. All business and industry in the UK, for instance, account for 25% of UK carbon emissions, or CO2e emissions, to be more accurate. And SMEs are a massive percentage of that. So we need to, as small and medium enterprise, not think that, no, it's just the big corporations that need to do this. The small ones do too. Andy, I'm aware that time is running out. So I don't know whether you want to drop in at this stage or not.
Yeah, you might as well continue on, Fran. If you've got a couple of slides, yeah, happy to go a couple more minutes, certainly.
Okay, so I just wanted to show you what we're doing with our clients that have expressed an interest about getting on the first step of this ladder and having a helping hand to move up with their ESG impact analysis, measurement, and, as we stress, narrative. Is we say to them, are you proud of what you do? What's your story? Okay, and we break down this consultancy process, which Alistair, myself, and Charlie are leading to bite-sized chunks. So we know that small businesses are busy, that it's really difficult to fit this in. So we help you make it doable. I've got a link there to how we actually do that. And in the next slide, I've just like the image really, which is about the man climbing up in these big steps. You know, you make some baby steps and you'll find the momentum will roll, and that you will start, you know, pulling in your team who will all want to be part of this ESG impact story. And that story, as I say, should be authentic and therefore more compelling than perhaps a collection of certifications and accreditations. My next slide takes you to a link that leads to our own triple bottom line narrative. We actually did the consultancy service on ourselves, and I wrote our first narrative for our impact of 2020. It needs updating, and it's a constantly evolving and, I think, very exciting story, because once you get on this you know, this train, you know, you can't stop. You need to constantly be looking at how you can improve. And yes, you get that warm glow, but it's also going to help your business to profit as well. I've put on our website, and I've cut and pasted it onto my next slide, that perhaps some simple steps to get you going if you've never really got going on carbon footprinting or you know, social or governance measurements, is to do it as an individual. Find a carbon calculator. Kogo is just one. Climate Heroes is one that I particularly like. Measure your own individual or household footprint first and see how that goes. GoCo is good. I've put it there because we're talking to businesses, and you can link it to your bank account if you're using a bank account app on your phone, and it will give you a real-time carbon footprint tracker. So you can see how your purchases relate to your carbon emissions as an individual, but as a company you can register if you do have some sort of backed up ESG record, and therefore all the people that are on Kogo, it's international, but you know, let's say in the UK, and in your area, so for us, Norfolk, Norwich, can see where the business making whatever they're looking for is on the app, and they will buy from them because they have ESG credentials. You can work on governance very quickly by just looking at your policies. Are they up to date? Are they doing the minimum in terms of looking after your people? And then what can you do that's even better? You know, would a 4-day week make them more productive and happier and healthier than forcing them to work 5 or 6 days just because you're constantly driving the business? And I've mentioned the other 2 links there. Good Business Charter and Economy for the Common Good will give you some inspiration in terms of the values that you would like to aspire to. So thanks, Andy, for that time. My last slide literally just says, this might all seem totally impossible and undoable. I'm far too busy. But as the quote says, most of the things worth doing in the world had been declared impossible before they were done. So I wish you luck. If you want to talk to us, we can help you start this journey. Thank you.
Thanks, Fran. And yeah, fantastic. I think those last few slides were really important. So glad that we got those included within the time. So thanks for all of the speakers today. Before we go on to Q&A, and I think this dovetails in really nicely with what Fran was saying, is that things like B Corps can be tricky, it can be difficult. So I just want to spend a couple of moments about what the bank are doing to support you, either as a NatWest customer or a NatWest customer in the future, around supporting entrepreneurs. And the two that I'll focus in on that you can see on the screen there is Business Builder, which is got kind of entry-level enterprise support tool. So a bit of a Netflix for business, so works really well for people looking to start up and getting proper policies in place. And you might want to upskill yourself on financial accounts, or identifying your customer avatar, or having a business model canvas. This is where Business Builder starts. It's completely free for everyone, so you don't have to be a NatWest customer to take advantage of that. And certainly for any aspiring business or early stage business, I would suggest taking a look at it. Simply Google NatWest Business Builder. But more importantly, what dovetails into today, in the third sort of rhombus there, if you like, he's got the accelerator program currently open, and one that will be of real interest is the Sustainability and Climate Accelerator. So these are open to NatWest customers or those who want to switch across to NatWest, fully funded by the bank. And for example, the Sustainability Accelerator is for those who want to obtain B Corps in the future. So we've talked that it's not straightforward, but actually there's some things here, along with your accountant, say at Triple Bottom Line, that the bank can do to support you. And likewise, if you're in fintech or you've got a climate change business, if you're looking to change the world, these accelerators are open. And what I love about them is, with the modern world as it is, historically they were run in London, but actually we've got this kind of hybrid model now. So businesses in, say, Norfolk, Suffolk and Essex have more opportunity to take advantage of these schemes. So currently open. So depending on when you watch this video, it may not be open, but again, just simply Google NatWest Accelerator and that will take you to the page to register your interest. But certainly, as we're recording today, applications are open, and of course would welcome anyone locally to take advantage of that. And to sign up for Business Builder, that's really straightforward. You've got a link there on the screen if you want to take a photo of it on your camera. And that will take you to that fully funded Netflix for business, and you can join the communities, you can join the events that we're doing locally and nationally to really upskill your business. So a couple of extra little value adds there for you today to kind of help and support what we've talked about today. So yeah, I wanted to just pick up on a couple of questions that have come through whilst we've been talking. So Peter, we'll start with you. I think you're still on the call. Yeah. So you mentioned earlier on, sort of, bringing this back to business, that you'd seen significant growth over the past few years, while still being able to make a contribution to your own ESG. I just wanted to explore how you think that has affected the growth. Is the growth because you're also doing these other things related to ESG, and is that providing a positive impact on those bottom line growth figures?
Absolutely. I mean, the key, we're a growth business, and so talking about the theory from the MBA program that I teach on the business school, you're not going to be taking out large profits and dividends when you're a growth business, because there's so much change going on. I mean, having to take 30% new clients in every year, it's not the same as doing what you did last year, because 30% of what you're doing is new. And so we've been investing in the people. So we don't want people to feel under immense pressure. So we've managed to reinvest any profits back in the business so that we can cope with that growth in a, I'm not going to say it's an easy life working at Triple Bottom Line Accounting, but under less pressure. Now, we're seeing businesses coming in because they're either environmental businesses or they're people like running trauma centers and so on. And this is happening on a national level. So half of our clients are coming in on a national level because they hear about us, because they start inquiring about the name Triple Bottom Line Accounting. And then when they look at our website, they see that it's authentic, that we are a living wage employer, that we are living what we're talking about. And so that whole purpose is then dominating our new business conversations. And so I think it's about that S-curve. As people consider where they and their businesses are in the world, they're then saying, I want to do business with people that also get it. Now, you see Extinction Revolution, people go through this change and they see and they understand that there's a climate crisis and there's a crisis for humanity. And some people jump on top of airplanes, right? And say, I'm not moving until the government acknowledges we're in a climate crisis, right? Other people like me go and do an MSc in economics, okay? And I'm not moving from the UEA until the education changes, okay? What we're seeing is that other people that take it, that do less extreme things, say, right, I want to deal with other businesses that get this. And that's that S-curve. I think that's that, right, I can see this and I want to reposition my business so I'm working with other businesses that also get this fact that there's a crisis and that as humanity, we need to be doing something about it. But you don't have to completely change your life to get onto this journey. It's about just merely looking at the medium and long term and saying, how are you going to position your business to something that's going to happen in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years? It's happening now, but it's going to accelerate up that S-curve. And so, I mean, yeah, I think that's it, really, isn't it? So that's my answer to the question.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Peter. I just wanted to pick on something up there that you mentioned around authenticity and bring Fran in perhaps at this point. So that you touched on the authenticity and ISOs and everything else. Where do you think that sort of sits with business about being authentic? I noticed at the weekend there was an article about businesses trying to be too authentic, and by doing that it became inauthentic in a sort of converse way. So as small businesses, how can we be really authentic, but without perhaps going over the line of being inauthentic and everything else?
I think it is a real conundrum, isn't it? Because we talk about narratives, we talk about telling stories, and when I was a kid, if you were telling stories, you were telling lies. That's what your parents would say to you. So we have this conflict with our own language. So how do you make your narrative or your story authentic? It has to be authentic, yeah? So collecting a badge and saying, we've just done this, but then not actually following it through. And I think it goes back to Alistair's step changes. You don't just do that, so I'll give you an example. Triple bottom line, with Alistair's help as a decarbonisation expert, we measured our carbon footprint very, very carefully. We did a simple calculator, then we did a more complex calculator, which looked at every single purchase we'd made in the whole of 2020. So we had a good pie chart of our carbon emissions. And we found that our CO2 emissions were concentrated over 70% on our suppliers, as opposed to ourselves, because we work in a passive house building. Our environmental footprint is quite small. Our employees walk or cycle or use electric vehicles to get to work. Not all of them, but a good percentage. So we then sat down and did a workshop with Alistair, where we looked at what we could reduce and quickly and by when, and we made our SME Climate Hub commitment to say that we would halve our CO2 emissions by 2030 at the latest, and work very hard to get to net zero. Now, our environmental impact is quite low, yeah? But by going through that process, we began to think about what we could do as a company. And one of the biggest things we can do is climate advocacy. We can't change some of the accounting software that we use and bookkeeping software that our clients use, but we can put pressure on those companies to make the changes. Where is that cloud storage coming from? Is it powered by renewable energy? Mostly no at the moment, but it's moving across there, and we can be part of that push. And by doing these things, rather than just saying these things, it then becomes authentic.
Yeah. like I found some wise words there, and I'd certainly agree. And I want to bring in Alistair now, just to pick up a point on suppliers, which I think is perhaps an interesting one. So you talked a little bit around the customers sort of maybe willing to pay more for a sustainable product. So the concept makes sense. But actually, is there a negative impact? So if a business was to do nothing, say on securing suppliers that are sustainable, actually could that then have a negative impact on the business if the supplier becomes embroiled in something later down the line? And how would that impact potentially the business?
Indeed, yes. I mean, there are certainly situations where organisations have found themselves in very hot water, where a supplier has crossed the line in some way. And that could be in terms of health and safety, or some legal requirement historically. But that is rapidly entering the space of environmental performance and other aspects such as social performance, diversity, etc., etc. So being seen to utilize and the right suppliers, and being seen to use the products and services of those suppliers gives one's own organization the credibility. It's putting your money where your mouth is. You can't expect people, your customers, your investors, you can't expect them to take your commitments seriously if you're not living and breathing them. And living and breathing them means that your everyday decisions in your organization need to be viewed through that lens, and with that framework of the environmental, social and governance aspects of doing business. So supplier choice, Fran mentioned Amazon and the supplier policy that TBLA have put in place as an example, is absolutely critical to that. Yes, you may still get your fingers burned, but you're a lot less likely to if you've made those right decisions, and it helps you very much to defend the decisions that you've made if you've done it in a sensible, in my view, sensible anyway, ESG motivated way, rather than just buying the cheapest product, no matter where it came from and who was exploited in its manufacture.
Yeah, and also think people respect, don't they, where best endeavours, if you put a policy in place and you follow it and it doesn't quite go to plan, then people are more understanding than if there's no plan at all. And I think one thing from today I've learned is, talking of Amazon, that's quite an interesting one. It might be for another day, but certainly something that I wasn't aware of. And I would guess that most people watching and listening to this webinar won't be aware of the kind of impact that Amazon has, but I say might be one for another day, because I guess that's probably a big topic that lots of people could contribute on.
And one only has to think about the impact that brands had in the fashion sector when all of the problems in Leicester and the sweatshops in Leicester came about. Several brands were impacted by that. So there's a case in point. If they had thought up front about the right thing to do, then they wouldn't have caught a cold in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. We all know that they say quite well publicised at the time. Lastly, then, before we wrap up today, I just want to bring Charlie in just around Orsted. I think a really interesting case study, around how a business can go from a high coal and carbon type business to what would seem a very successful low carbon business. I just wonder what the change, and we're surmising here, but what the change of mindset was at that big business. When do you think that they sat around the table and suddenly the light came on? It must have been quite something, for a big business like that to make the change.
Yeah, it really must have been. And to be honest, it's hard to know exactly when that was. It's going to be fairly recently, but it's at least within the last 5 to 10 years. So they're definitely ahead of the curve and on their way up that hypergrowth S-curve that Pete spoke about, because for the last 2 years alone, they've been labelled the most sustainable company in the world. It's hard to know the operational changes themselves, but you can see things like wind turbines and just moving away from non-renewable resources entirely and relocating to other sources has been a massive impact. And then I think the social changes sort of come with that. I think Fran sort of spoke about the employees embodying the business's ethics, and I think that's the exact case with Orsted. They said, right, well, this is the way we should do it, and all of their employees sort of said, yeah, you're right, and followed suit. And then, that being such a large company, the ripples are going to be felt far wider than just them, across society and now globally as well. So yeah, I hope that sort of answers your question a bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I wonder whether there was sort of one person originally, one person stood up and say, actually, we need to change. And, there must have been that point in time where there was a sole voice, but actually it grew over time to, as you say, work its way down the workforce. So I'm sure if they can do it, then that is a good case study for all of us, isn't it? Such a big company. Brilliant. Well, thank you, guys. And thanks, everyone, for joining today. Just wanted to say a big thank you to Peter, Fran, Charlie, and Alistair. Some really useful insight there, some great takeaways, and actually great exploration in, how we can make a positive difference to the world. And, I think this is just the start of the conversation. You might be listening to this in 2021, you might be listening in 2022. I think it will all still ring true, and this will become more and more important as time goes by, and something certainly that I want to do as a representative of NatWest. I want to support businesses to kind of make that change. So thank you, guys. Thanks for listening. If you want to get in contact with any of our speakers, I'd suggest, Triple Bottom Line. You can Google them. Alistair Maple Cone. I don't know how many maple cones there are, but I think you'll be quite easy to find with a Google search. So get in touch with these guys if you have any questions. And for now, I'll wish you all very well, and look forward to seeing you all again soon.